Okay, today I'm delighted to be talking with a good buddy of mine from the UK, specifically in London, and that's Noel Bell. He is a psychotherapist who has over 20 years of experience working as really kind of a media figure as well, because he speaks regularly about addictions, social media, mental health on television, radio. He hosts a very delightful podcast called Noel Bell Psychotherapy, where he talks with many leaders in the field about their research and about their practice. And he comes from a perspective, a background from transpersonal integrative. And I think he is one of our champions of our work. And I think someone who's trying to spread the good aspects of therapy work to not just among people in our field, but further. So thank you, my friend, for talking with me today.
You're very welcome, Paul. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity, and thank you for such a nice drum roll there.
I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit because you've had not only your own clinical practice for many years, and you deal a lot with media. If people go to your website, which by the way is noelbell.net, there's video of you working on television and things like that. But I also would like to talk to you a little bit about kind of this idea of integrative therapy, which is a very important piece of your work. And as I was telling you earlier, sometimes people get confused about what integrative is, and they kind of think it's just total eclectic, as in, 1 minute I'm a Gestalt therapist, the next minute I'm a CBT, and then the next minute I'm strategic. But there's much more to that. So could you kind of give us an overview, at least from your perspective and your training and work, about integrative therapy and counseling?
Okay, well, I was particularly drawn to the integrative approach, Paul, because I didn't think there was one approach that would satisfy every way of working with a client. So I like to think, I'm an early tutor saying, you're turning up with a toolbox on the job, and you have many different spanners and different compartments in that toolbox. So I kind of probably think about the holistic nature of the approach, that it's, mind, body, and maybe spirit, although I'm not sure what I believe in terms of spirit. I'm very much agnostic or stroke atheist on that level. So I'm full of contradictions, probably going down the transpersonal route. But also in terms of theory, that I'm integrative, and that I don't just adopt a psychoanalytic approach, although aspects of my training were in psychodynamic. And I'm not just working with the body in terms of Gestalt, but I'm actually just embracing different models, different approaches. And just before we started recording, we were just idly chatting, and that thing about pluralist, eclectic, integrative, it probably takes a bigger brain than mine to actually properly articulate that, because I'm often as well thinking, what's pluralist, what's eclectic, what's just a bit of doing everything that some people think integrative is. But on a personal level, I kind of like to just embrace, think of what works. And for certain clients, for certain issues, I like to try and keep an open mind. If anyone who comes through the door, like we've talked before, it's interesting being this side of the camera, this side of the microphone, about, you're creating a magical session. And I remember just in that discussion, we were sort of thinking about everyone is unique that comes through the door. And I'm not trying to kind of fit, the square pegs into round holes. I'm trying to kind of just think, well, what works with this person? Does the analytic approach work with this person who's very intellectual and rational? Right. Someone else who might be very felt sense, who might work better with their body, who's in touch with their body, because often we just sit in our bodies. And I was listening to a trauma lecture recently Dan Siegel was given, and that we don't actually often think, what does it mean to be in my body? What does that mean? Am I aware of skin and cells? And, so I kind of just try to stay open-minded as best I can, and then think, what's best for this client, and hope that that creates the fertile ground for some therapeutic growth. And if it doesn't, I can also have in that toolbox something around resources to maybe change course.
Mhm. So it sounds to me like in order for you to be successful in your work, uh, that you also have to kind of rely on your gut a little bit, intuitive nature to assess where somebody's coming from. And it doesn't sound like people are too preset into a certain or theoretical orientation or technical application. You're just kind of meeting them where they are, and then kind of seeing where you can go together, if metaphorically.
Yeah, I hope so, Paul. Yeah. When I was recently chatting to Scott Miller, I'm probably quite defaulting to the intellectual theoretical models approach. That's where I kind of go, thinking if I read a new book or hear of a new theory, I'm all excited about it.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
he was making the point, and I thought it was quite interesting what he was saying, was that, often as therapists, what we think is quite sexy in small s languages, maybe not so important to clients. Clients just want to really get heard. So the outcome measure there is empathy.
Mhm.
They're not really too fussed what the latest theoretical model is. And I think that's a point I probably really, that's a note to self,
Right,
pay heed to that,
right.
because I think I can kind of be a victim of, well, I can pay too much attention, put it that way, to uh, theory, outcomes,
Sure.
how change occurs and how it can all be kind of conceptualized. But really, if I can walk in someone's shoes and really hear them, I think that can go a long way. And then kind of and I think the magic of a session for me is when, because, let's face it, people are paying us
Mhm. Right.
money, and often it's their hard-earned money for us to facilitate change. So in a sense, we kind of are the experts in their minds, and they want us to facilitate some change. So in a sense, it's my duty to them. For instance, if I'm working with maybe a client who can be passive aggressive in their life, and where they can have better and more powerful for them relationships by asserting themselves better. Well, in the professional relationship with me, I might suggest to them, hang on, you said that in jest, but maybe, are you angry with me? And just by doing that, therapy can be very dynamic. They
Yeah.
can then express, maybe they are angry with me, but it's a safe place to express it. And then, as we know, the microcosm of how change occurs, the therapy can be the microcosm of how they facilitate change in their outer life. And that's how it all works, maybe.
Yeah. Well, seems to be a connecting thread through a lot of the things I've heard you say, not just here in our talk, but in other talks, and that's this, like saying, are you angry with me? And so
Mm.
there's this authenticity that seems to drive how you work. And you're coming from a existential, transpersonal background tied in with that. Authenticity is very important from those perspectives. How much does authenticity with your clients, how does that feel for you as a component of the change process?
Well, I think it's an excellent question, Paul. I mean, I think it, um, it is a factor. I mean, I was always um, reluctant myself A, as a client, and B, as a trainee therapist, to adopt the archetypal therapist stance,
Hmm.
and that just was never going to be me. Now, am I so chilled and authentic that I don't have any kind of professional filter? Well, obviously not, but I try just to be. I remember one of my tutors when I was doing my original training saying, all that you've learned, it was almost like the passing out kind of talk. And it was like, if I remember correctly, it was something like, all the knowledge and all your tools and techniques and could be very useful, but what will serve you best in your careers going forward will be the ability to just be yourself.
Hmm.
So I think if that is authentic, the question is then, what is my authentic self anyway, in life or as a therapist? So that begs more questions. But does that kind of
Yeah.
answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah. Because, you think about integration, you're doing a therapy integration and authenticity, making that, your being as part of the therapy. And in some um, trainings historically, and probably still today, there is almost a taboo or a cautious fear of, don't bring too much of yourself to the session, because obviously we don't want to make the session about us because it's
Yeah.
about them. But yet, by staying so detached, and we just it's like the going to the tax office or something. It's rather than having a connection with someone. And I don't know how real true change happens in therapy without some degree of authenticity. Because if we come down, it's back to the therapeutic relationship, which is the foundation. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there are people who do change with therapists who are kind of the blank slate and all, but I would
Mm-hmm.
find that next to impossible to work. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how you feel, but
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, sometimes just thinking of theory, and so a psychoanalyst would, I think it's fair to say, chiefly work with the transference. So working from that approach, there's that necessitates a blank screen. In fact, if you're traditional Freudian would be couch and lying facing the opposite way.
right.
And the idea being that the unconscious hostilities can get activated through the blank screen approach of the therapist. And that is one side of a debate. And um, I just think I don't know why I'm not particularly attuned to that as the only way of working. I mean, I can sometimes embrace parts of that for certain types of clients if maybe they need to learn tighter boundaries, for instance, or
Right.
if the situation requires it. But that approach just seems a bit potentially oppressive. Um, so that's why I did not train to be a psychoanalyst.
Right. Right.
So something about authenticity and relationality. I mean, in a sense, relationality came about through psychoanalysts who, over the years, began to kind of bring in to throw away the idea of the blank screen and become more relational.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we now accept maybe that relationality within therapy is more the norm than not.
Right. Right. When you're on this idea of relationality with people, you're working with someone hypothetically. And if you feel that level of connection and relation isn't quite where you think it needs to be, do you kind of real quickly tune into that? And what are some things that you may do? And I know every client's different, so I get that. But what are some things you would do to kind of try to facilitate that bridge of relation in a session if you feel it's not quite where it needs to be?
Well, on a very simple level, sometimes it might require just naming the fact that we're not connecting. And that, the way sometimes naming the obvious can sometimes create an opportunity for greater connection.
Right.
It's like saying, oh, there doesn't seem to be a bridge between the two sides of the river, but by naming the fact that there isn't, a bridge appears.
Right.
So it might be that I sense that they don't really think I know what it's like to walk in their shoes. And sometimes I might ask them, does it feel like I don't get you? And so I'm quite upfront like that. I mean, I will just name it, and then sometimes, especially sometimes new clients, there might be, I don't know whether you've had this experience, but sometimes I'll have a session with a new client and I'll just sense there's something very disappointing in them. And I might just say, I just mid-session or maybe 3/4 in, it doesn't feel like something has really happened for you, or was this what you were expecting?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that can be the way in to then, just exploring more.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'm often, and it's just then a question I have generally about therapy. Is it just, a failure of empathy, or is it going back to our outcome measures around what works in therapy? Or is it that just some people are better with others? I mean, I've been a client of many therapists over the years. I used to say that I used to be ashamed of that. When I was a trainee therapist, I think, oh, well, I had therapy, but I had to have it because it was professional requirements. Like, it was always like, don't think I'm crazy. So it's amazing how subtle that shame can be.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always questioned whether, with some people, I would be more inclined to reveal very personal, vulnerable material than I would to others. And it's not necessarily that one person is doing anything wrong compared to another. So I just wonder, is it like, to use the horse racing analogy, is it horses for courses? And I don't know, question.
Yeah, right. Because it depends on who's describing it. So the New Ager types would say where it's an lack of an energetic connection, whereas the behaviors will say where there's subtle body cues that you aren't connecting, and maybe it's all of that. But there's
Yeah.
definitely, and I don't know if you've had this experience. I mean, I would be surprised if you haven't, of not being in session, just going to the store and people, you're waiting and you just speak to them, and it seems like they feel safe to talk to you. I had a situation a while back where a gentleman, I was waiting to meet somebody at this kind of little diner. This gentleman comes out, older man, so he told me he was waiting for someone as well, and he's had to go down to Florida where his mother was because she had dementia, and he's got to pack her up and bring her up to where he lived in north of where we were. But then within 2 minutes, he starts telling me about, a lot of stress, and he and his wife aren't getting along, and they're starting to sleep in different beds. And I'm just sitting there waiting, and I wasn't ignoring the guy, but I just kind of felt also a similar connection with him, even though he's this big old burly looking kind of biker type. I mean, you've probably had that same kind of thing happen with you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it can work. I was just thinking, sometimes like over the years in placements or going on different courses or doing different CPD, there's people you'll naturally click with,
Mm-hmm.
and there's people you'll maybe naturally have personality clashes with. And
Right.
maybe that's a lot of it, like in probably any industry or any walk of life, it's sometimes luck about who you get placed with or who you meet along on your journey. I just have, the Jungian approach though, as I'm saying that, thinking, but even the people you don't get on with are the people that could be your best friends.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's kind of funny too. It's like being able to, the more authentic you are in session, it opens up that in your you as the therapist in your daily life. And I sometimes, I don't know about you, but have to catch myself because when I'm just talking to people, regular folks, not in session, being authentic for a lot of people is a little disarming and maybe sometimes frightening, or they don't know how to react when you're honest, not in an ugly way, but just, no, I don't think I really want to do that. And we're like, oh, well, we're not used to those kind of
Mm,
things. Whereas in our sessions, in a way that maybe that's some of what our clients are paying for, someone to say like, I'm not feeling like we're connecting. What
yeah.
do you think's going on there? Because can you imagine, your new boss at work, and then after half a day, I just don't feel we're connecting. What's going on? And,
Yeah.
you know, okay,
Yeah.
let me write. So Leslie's already a problem. Let's write his name down and see
Yeah.
about the first round of firings. How do you navigate that from your perspective? That authenticity in daily life and in session.
Well, I think it goes back to people are coming to us for helping to try and help them facilitate their change, and we're doing them um, a service. And I just think, just going back to that example of people who, if you think of ego states, and this is why I love so many different theories and models. People just say, well, do you need theory? But it helps frame and conceptualize change for me. So if I think of, what Eric Berne was saying around ego states, and if, you're in child mode in certain situations and you become aware of that and you get the insight of, well, when there's something hierarchical going on where there's power in a situation and where there's a claim being handed out, I go into child mode, and then you start exploring that. Well, or they might be, in Cartman language if they're being victim, and or the rescuer maybe, and this pervades everything they do in their life. Well, I think spotting and just naming in as they talk about what's been going on, by just being sort of interactive and maybe holding them to account to say, oh, is that another example of, why was it your responsibility to do X, Y, and Z? And they go, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. And
Mm-hmm.
then they start seeing where they do victimize themselves, or they're the ones who are always rescuing, or they go into child mode. And then, you've got a conversation, and this is where, I guess what people are coming for. It's certainly what I wanted as a client. I wanted, well, I wanted to be heard. There was nothing more infuriating for me as a client to be interrupted. Now, call me a self-centered narcissist, but as a client, I wanted to tell my story.
Right.
And that's what I was paying someone to do initially. Now, if it wasn't just for me to talk for 50 minutes every day, but I needed to tell my story and I needed to feel listened to. Then I wanted insights, and that's where I needed to be held account and some people you would say to be analyzed, but to for me to be equipped with the insight to see where I was maybe going wrong, or to have a different perspective. And then it was more interactive, and that's where I felt like I've benefited tremendously from past therapy. But importantly, at the start, I really needed to be heard. And if I was ever in a session starting with a new therapist, and they were like, if I was listening to you, and then it's like, and you're telling me your story, and I'm like, oh, great, fantastic. Now, just take a moment. How are you feeling? Where in your body are you feeling that? I would just feel like they've hijacked the session, So I try not to, certainly try not to interrupt unless I'm well established with someone and I feel like, it's appropriate to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. In the whole idea, as we were talking about earlier, about being authentic, is giving the authenticity also to the client to tell their story. I mean, that's one of the big things I found when I moved around to different theories and ideas, is that most of them, when done well, the client generally feels heard. They feel like they're able to tell. And when we jump in, and I have been guilty of this is my moment of authenticity, of trying to do too much technical too soon.
Mm-hmm.
Even when the outcome was really good, the client, I think, still felt a little cheated because, yeah, okay, I feel better, and the hypothetically the problem solved, but that disclosing to be authentic and telling my story is kind of taken away from them. Maybe when we get too directive or too technical.
Mm. Yeah. So so that I just understand what you meant. So you felt you were doing everything right, and they got the right outcome. But how could it have been different?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that the
yeah.
yeah
Spend more time on the empathy, the narrative.
yeah
I mean, there's some people that come in and they tell a story in 5 minutes and you're done, and then you can go to work. But some people need the whole session to tell you and to feel. And I think, you're right when we say, we got to honor those stories instead of trying to jump in and, how are you feeling? Now, where in the body? Okay, now here's what I want you to do.
yeah
And it's like,
yeah
I just started the story, It's,
yeah 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 absolutely. And that begs the question then, if I'm a thinking of theoretical approaches, and I embrace a lot of the cognitive distortions and the thought patterns associated with the CBT approach. But the reason why I'm not a strictly CBT practitioner is that I don't think that this might be unfair to the CBT people, but I just don't think there's enough around the relationship building, and it's more of a manualized, evidence-based, outcome-driven model for me. So
right.
yeah, and I think in the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, they, if you do manage to get a session after waiting for probably 6 to 9 months from your family doctor to be referred to, you'll get probably 6 sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And within those 6 sessions, you're fixed.
Hmm.
I just think it's unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it takes 6 sessions just to understand what the problem is, even that, and you'd be doing well even to do that. But to then work on it, you're supposed to be within 6 sessions sending them on their way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of, I think it's still tying into that kind of medical model. You break your arm, it's supposed to be a certain number of weeks before the cast comes off, and then a little bit of mobility exercises. So by this time, your arm will be repaired and you can get back into playing whatever sport you want to play,
Mm.
because that's the way it works. And so I think, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, well, 6 sessions or whatever amount should be, what it is, because that's the way arms repair themselves. But everybody is so unique. It's hard to say that, even if I break my arm, you break yours, you may heal a week faster than me, or a
Yeah.
week or two longer. So there's even variations in there, but to let alone our psyche, that we're all in this kind of easy one size fits all, which again, citing the research, and you brought up Scott Miller, that has found that that's not beneficial to outcomes, is to try to get everyone in this rigid model of work. So when you said that, it just brought up a thought to me: is uh, do people seek you out sometimes when they hear that you're not like that?
Um, I'm not even sure if people will necessarily know. I often wonder, unless you're a trainee therapist yourself, do you know what you're looking for when you go looking for a therapist? I mean, my first and second and probably third, I was thinking, oh, well, I need a CBT therapist. If you'd asked me why, I'd think, oh, well, because someone said it's great.
Right, right,
I had no idea what the difference was between approaches. Saying I was integrative, saying if someone said they were integrative, they might have just said they were. They might as well have been talking a foreign language. I just had no idea.
right.
Um, so do I guess? But the thing is, in terms of the way I work, because you mentioned in your very generous drum roll at the start some of the work I've done, and um, I think there's probably enough of me out there to
Mm-hmm.
know probably what I'm about. So it's not like they're approaching, I know other practitioners who you just wouldn't see a photo of them between here and the moon
Right,
anywhere. And they're completely, you barely even know their gender
right.
or their race or their age profile, or almost, you might know their theoretical approach. Um, and I'm not saying that that's a problem. It's just, with me, people will, probably they know about me
Mm-hmm.
before approaching me to work with me,
Mm-hmm.
for good or bad. Maybe, what I put out there, turns, so I'm sure it does probably turn some people off. But so maybe the people who come through are open to that way of working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, kind of a last question here. If, and I know you do supervision as well, and so what advice do you give to either a new therapist or an established therapist who says, this integrative approach, I really want to know if that's right for me? Do you have any advice that you would, or have given?
Uh, Good question. It requires some thought. I think what I would say is those that have trained in to seek supervision, I think maybe from a different discipline to what you trained in is probably a good idea. That would be considered weird to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think to just stay in your one approach and all your CPD and your supervision is either from the same institute or at least the same modality, I just think is a bit limiting. So I guess to be open to different perspectives is good. Now, that's all encased, I think, by the probably fair accusation that some integrative therapists can be potentially, jack of all trades,
Mm-hmm.
master of none.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a fair question to ask. So what I would say to that is that, you know, the master of none, you've got a whole lifetime of CPD and professional development to, you know, start to specialize really in key areas. And, you know, not that this is about deliberate practice, but if you were to think about what your own deficiencies are and where your areas of improvement are, to then focus the attention and training and ongoing tuition and professional collaboration on those areas, then we're, you know, that will improve our authenticity and hopefully our effectiveness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
That
listen,
was probably a very long way of answering your question,
no,
Paul.
listen, that's a
Apologies.
great answer. No, that's a great answer. And the whole thing about getting supervision from somebody outside your comfort zone of your theoretical orientation, I think is spot on. I think that's a great idea, definitely. Well, listen, you've given us a great deal of things to think on because I think we're talking a little deeper than maybe we either of us realized because there's some, I think, important things to kind of reflect on, and I'll be reflecting on this after we're done. But I really, as always, I appreciate you talking to me today, and we need to do this again sometime.
Definitely, Paul. It's been a real pleasure, and we will be definitely staying in touch. There's lots of co-exploring to do.
Yeah, absolutely.